When I was a kid, I remember this expression in my house called a do-over. A do-over was a second chance to get something right. And once we got a Nintendo system, the old 16-bit, the first Nintendo, I remember playing Super Mario Brothers. And, of course, anybody who knows me in computer games or video games, nodding to Father Joe there, I get kind of obsessed with getting it right. So you can imagine how many do-overs you just hit the reset button. That if I didn't like what happened, then I'd hit the reset button. And brothers and sisters, if we approach life this way, we might end up with an understanding or a spiritual attitude of a certain kind of perfectionism within ourselves, that somehow we are the ones that are supposed to get it right. When I was studying in university and exploring spirituality and exploring different religions and not having a good firm foundation in my Catholic faith, and when the Lord began to touch my heart and bring me back to my senses about the Catholic faith, I looked at the other religions I had been studying, and I realized something, that things like reincarnation within Hinduism and Buddhism, that basically it's the understanding from a spiritual point of view that the person themselves is supposed to somehow fix themselves, and that therefore their actions are going to determine where they're going to be, etc., because there is no savior in those religions. We as Catholics instead have a savior. We believe that Jesus is our savior, that God the Father directly intervenes in our lives. And this is what we hear in today's first reading from the book of the prophet Jeremiah. It reminds me, too, and I feel very consoled when I hear this, that God basically says we're like clay in his hands, so that if something starts to get misshapen, he, the potter, is able to correct it. And it's amazing, because what we don't hear, we don't hear that the clay has to fix itself. So the pressure's off. Obviously, the clay needs to be there. And we're not irrational clay, I get that. But there is something to be said for us recognizing what it means to correspond to God's actions. And part of it is just surrender. Surrender. When we hear in the gospel Jesus talking about the end of the age, we do hear, okay, yes, that which at the end of the age is good and that which at the end of the age is bad gets separated. But that's when everything's done. So that if we haven't repented by surrendering to God, obviously we'll end up in the pile of fish that get tossed away or thrown away. But for now, there's time for us to say, God, I'm yours. Make me into the vessel you want to make me. So brothers and sisters, for us as Catholics, corresponding to God's grace is probably easier than we think. Because sometimes we think we have to do all these Herculean feats. And sometimes even people within the church who do not quite understand God's grace and God's action make it seem like we're the ones who have to go after God. God has already come after us, and our job is basically to make sure that we're in the way, that we get in his way, and that we let him find us. Like the hound of heaven, that instead of chasing after God, we let God, who is chasing after us, catch us. So brothers and sisters, we ask God today for the grace of trust, to be able to trust in God, that when we do sit down to do our devotions and our prayers, that we remember we're not the ones who have to do this perfectly. We just put ourselves in God's hands, recognizing we're already beloved, and therefore asking God, remove the lumps from me, smooth out any areas where I've gotten a bit crusty, add some water to any of the areas where I'm a little too dry, and have your way in me, God. We are very blessed, as the psalm said, because our help is the God of Jacob.